As Ben Watt says at the start of his book, we only ever see the second half of our parents' lives together, the downhill part. The golden years we have to piece together. And so that's what he set out to do. The result is Romany and Tom. And just to save you the bother of texting in, it is Ben Watt from Everything But the Girl. Ben, good afternoon to you.
Hello.
What prompted you to do this?
Oh, it's a good question. I wrote a book back in the mid-90s about surviving a rare illness, and it was quite well received, and my mum and dad featured in it as quite big characters. And lots of people said, we'd love to hear more about them. And every time I've always told anecdotes and stories about my family, people have always boggled a bit and gone, and so I felt that the time would arrive when I would finally have to confront this.
But were they to a degree, because it's probably the case if a child thinks about their parents' lives, that the bit prior to you being born, or perhaps all the kids being born, is somewhat shrouded in mystery. Were there holes there that you had to try and fill in?
Of course. I mean, I think we all have a skeleton appreciation of our parents' lives. We know their greatest hits, if you like. It's often that's how they choose to tell their story to us. They hold back certain things. They tell us the Christmas anecdotes, all these kind of things. But what impressed me most when I did the research was, as I started to fill in the detail, you start to get a sense of the human scale of what was going on. And I felt that humanizing quality actually brought me a lot closer to them, because they seemed very flawed. Yeah. And I actually loved them all the more for it, actually.
Was that research difficult to do, and were your parents to any degree resistant to it?
Well, I think, as I kind of point out in the book, my mum was a great self-publicist and a great believer in the written word as making life real. Yeah. And I think she'd be secretly pleased that this had happened. I mean, I still see her now. She suffers from a rather awful form of hallucinatory dementia, but I still go and see her, and we still have moments where we connect. And I show her the book when I go and say, you've been in the paper this week, Mum, because I've had the book published. And she said to me last week, "It's where I like to be." Yes. So, I certainly think she wouldn't have minded that a story was told.
And was it particularly because your mom was a writer, she was a journalist, that she had left behind lots of diaries and letters and the like that you were able to use as a source?
Well, yeah, she was a journalist for the second half of her life. Originally, she wanted to be an actress and had a stalled career working in Stratford-upon-Avon. Restarted her life as a showbiz writer and columnist. And yes, she did document her own public appearance quite comprehensively in a series of scrapbooks, and often with inserted post-it notes and little arrows reminding us exactly what Woody Allen looks like. And that's Michael Caine sitting on the table just behind, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, very nice. And your dad was he exclusively a jazz musician? Did he play any other styles of music?
That was it, and that's all he wanted to do. And he had his heyday for 5 golden years in the late 50s, where he emerged almost out of nowhere in London. He'd been a kind of jobbing pianist in a lot of the bands in Soho at the time. A friend of his gave him some money to record his first jazz orchestral session, which is what he really wanted to do, be a big band leader. And it was impressive enough to get him onto the BBC. And then he got his own quintet at Quaglino's, which was the kind of leading hipster night spot in London, and suddenly he was on the map out of nowhere. And he had his own show at lunchtime with his own orchestra on the BBC called Time for What? Yeah. And those were the days. You have to forgive them. That kind of thing.
Well, at the time, that was an original.
Yeah. But the sad thing, of course, with him was that it lasted 5 years, and then basically the sound he loved was barged into the past by rock and roll. Yeah. So, there's a kind of sense of tragedy emerging, as you can see from the story.
Also very intriguing, and I suppose is an odd thing to study up when you're the child, is that your parents were both married when they met to other people, obviously.
Yes. Well, when I was growing up, it was always painted in quite light-hearted terms.
Yeah.
You know, my dad would say things like, "Oh, I couldn't resist her," or "I was," you know, and it was always done in a quite sort of sensual way that we couldn't keep our hands off each other. But of course, again, with the research, and I realised that the affair that they had lasted 5 years, which is actually a very long time, especially when their respective partners found out within 6 months. And it just went on with all that collateral damage, wounded partners, confused children, divorce laws of the late 1950s, which were, precluded you from doing almost anything for 3 years. So it was a tortuous time. And I think, again, that gave it a sense of human scale and made it very sympathetic. And then when I was finally born in 1962, it was only 6 months after the divorce papers finally came through, and only 6 weeks after my dad nearly went to prison for a drugs possession outside Ronnie Scott's. So
Crikey.
it was really quite a heavy time.
Yeah. And your mother, did she already have 4 kids from the previous relationship?
She did.
Yeah.
She had triplets in the mid-1950s and another one, so she had four kids already.
Did they live in the same house with you? How did that all work?
Yeah, after the divorces and my parents' marriage, she moved in with my dad and I was born, and then my half-brothers and sisters all lived in the same flat. We were on 2 floors of a house, and my grandmother lived on the ground floor as this sort of, almost like my mother's conscience, this sort of ghost living downstairs, passing judgment on all of us.
Yeah.
So it was very theatrical, all of it.
Yeah, but it's interesting in the sense that what you say about your parents meeting each other and the way that your father particularly would describe it to you, that whilst no doubt there were people all around them disapproving of that, the fact of that disapproval, do you think it almost heightened the romance of it for the two of them?
There was probably an aspect of that to it. It probably added a frisson, I would say, is probably the modern word. But I think it was hard as well. I think my mum genuinely thought it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And it drove her into depression for about a year in the middle of it, when she thought she was going to be stuck with what she had, which is what she didn't want. But there was all that guilt attached to it because she loved the man with whom she had her original children. It's just that he didn't really light her up. Yeah,
there is a very poignant line there in one of the letters where he writes to her and says, "I'm sorry for boring you."
Yeah. No, I mean, he comes out of the story, I think, with a great amount of humility, very magnanimous. I was so impressed by his letters. I mean, beautifully worded, hand-tooled, kind of very heartbroken letters that he writes. But he was... he was a very respected man in his own right. Richard Findlater, theatre critic for The Observer.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah.
Pretty much discovered John Osborne and was the first person to write about Look Back in Anger. So, there was... They were...
Your parents, though, at the same time, while they clearly love each other, they were able to have quite volcanic rows at times. Was that just in the nature of them? Was alcohol often a component to that?
Yeah. I mean, alcohol was my dad's worst enemy. I mean, it was the thing that gave him the courage to put himself forward, but it was also the thing that made him bolshy. And I think it lost him in his professional life as many jobs as it gained him, because it made him speak his mind. And that wasn't something you really wanted to hear.
Yes. Because was he quite strident in his politics?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew up with a very opinionated father, factory worker, foreman, Christian socialist, very moralising, all about probity, godliness. And this was rammed down his throat every night, after school. And what is interesting is that he broke away from that, became a jazz musician, lost his accent, moved to London, but he retained that kind of parochial attitude, slightly judgmental, but in his own sphere. So he was a big atheist and a big socialist as well.
Yeah.
And he packed a heavy punch for his height.
Probably most people, you reach a certain age, especially when your parents start to age and you start looking in the mirror, and I know I do. My father is dead now, but I look in the mirror and see my father every day. My sister says I walk the same as him, all those things. Given that you've researched their past so much, do you see yourself all over the place?
Of course. I mean, I see similarities, but at the same time I try very hard to iron them out, and I mean I did have a very mixed upbringing. On the one hand, it was very loving. I don't want people to think that this is some bleeding heart story that I was hard done by when I was growing up. That's not what the book's about at all. But I was aware that I was involved with two quite narcissistic, self-absorbed people. And I myself am quite a narcissistic, self-absorbed person, like most of us are. Yeah. And you just have to remind yourself that there are very impressionable little people around. Yeah. And you have to make time for them too, and your kids are important. And if you don't get it right early on, you'll never get it right with them. Yeah. So,
the book is called Romany and Tom. Ben, pleasure to meet you. Thanks a million for coming in to talk to us today.